There's a territory within each of us, a vast and often unexplored space where language fails and only sensation remains. It is the realm of the body, of instinct, of desire in its purest and most unfiltered form. Many of us move through life touching only the surface of this realm, responding to impulses, following social and cultural scripts about what pleasure is, what eroticism is, what we are allowed to feel. Sexuality, then, becomes a performance, a set of expectations to be fulfilled, a destination to be reached, rather than a continuous journey of discovery. But what if we invited you to a different kind of exploration? One that does not seek quick answers or foolproof techniques, but instead proposes a return to the source of everything, yourself. This is an invitation to dive into conscious pleasure, a practice of turning inward with curiosity and courage, to recognize sexuality not as an appendix to life, but as a central force of self-knowledge and integration. To begin this journey, we must first look at the shadows we cast over our instincts. Carl G. Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, spoke of the shadow, that part of our psyche that holds everything we repress, deny, or deem unacceptable. In a culture that often divides the human being between reason and emotion, spirit and flesh, the body and its most primal desires are frequently relegated to that shadow. Lust, the vital drive that moves us, is domesticated, labeled sinful, vulgar, or purely mechanical. We deny its complexity, its own intelligence. To integrate the shadow, in the Jungian sense, does not mean becoming a slave to our impulses, but rather recognizing their existence and giving them a place in the light of consciousness. It is accepting that instinct is not the opposite of consciousness, but its fundamental raw material. When we embrace this denied part, we do not become more wild in a destructive sense. On the contrary, we gain a deeper freedom. True freedom is born from self-knowledge, not from ignorance of our own parts. In this context, Georges Bataille's erotism offers a profoundly philosophical vision that resonates with this quest. For Bataille, eroticism is precisely what distinguishes the human from the animal. The animal has sexuality, a purely instinctive and functional act. The human being, aware of death and of the discontinuity of their being, creates eroticism. Eroticism, for him, is a consented transgression of the boundaries that define us, is a little death, an ecstasy that momentarily dissolves us, that pulls us out of our isolated individuality and fuses us with the other, with the world. This is not a light or simple view of pleasure. It is dark, intense, and deeply spiritual. Conscious pleasure, then in Bataille's light, can be understood as the pursuit of this sacred transgression, not as an act of violence, but as a deliberate surrender to that which undoes and reconstructs us. It is to be fully present at that threshold where the I dissolves, where the body ceases to be a separate object and becomes pure experience, pure presence. But how can we cultivate this presence in a world that seems to conspire against it? We live in the age of distractions, of superficial connections, of rapid consumption, even of experiences. Zygmunt Bauman, in Liquid Love, precisely describes how our relationships have become fragile, fearful of solid commitments, always seeking something better, less risky. This liquidity seeps into our sexuality. Desire becomes a product to be consumed. Lust becomes a button to be pressed on demand through quick, disposable stimuli. We lose the ability to savor, to linger, to allow desire to build its own inner architecture, slowly and organically. The freedom we believe we have, in this context, is often the freedom to choose between prepackaged options, not the freedom to create an authentic experience from our most intimate core. This is where contemporary practices, such as tantra and slow sex, offer a powerful antidote. They are not, in essence, about exotic positions or feats of endurance, but about a radical repositioning of attention. They are disciplines of presence. In slow sex, for instance, the goal is not orgasm, but the sensory quality of each instant. It's about slowing down enough to perceive the blood flowing under the skin, the barely perceptible tremor of a muscle, the change in the other's breathing pattern. It's about making touch a meditation, where the mind does not wander to past or future, but anchors itself in the touch, in the temperature, in the texture. This is the core of conscious pleasure, the ability to feel fully, without the interference of judgment, haste, or the mental script that tells us how we should be feeling. The body, far from being a pleasure machine, reveals itself as a universe of subtle sensations, an instrument of knowledge and connection. Imagine, for a moment, the simple experience of drinking a sip of water when you're thirsty. In the rush of the day, it is a mechanical act. Now imagine doing it with total presence, feeling the cool glass against your lips, the liquid filling your mouth, the sensation of satisfaction flowing down your throat, the relief spreading through your body. The act remains the same, but the experience is transformed, deepened, enriched. The same happens with touch, with a kiss, with a gaze. Eroticism begins to inhabit these minimal spaces, these intervals between actions. It ceases to be an event and becomes a quality of attention that colors the entire experience. Desire, then, is no longer a switch that turns on or off, but an inner landscape in constant transformation, with its seasons, its climate, its unique geography. To know this landscape is the work of self-knowledge. It is learning the language of your own lust, which is not always loud and urgent. Sometimes it's a whisper, a slight magnetic pull, a silent curiosity asking to be explored with patience. This first part of the journey is, therefore, an invitation to slow down. It is a call to look at your own shadow, at the instincts you may have learned to fear or deny, and to see them not as enemies, but as allies in the pursuit of a fuller life. It is a proposal to rescue eroticism from the banality of consumption and restore it to its sacred place, in the Battalion sense, as an experience that confronts us with the limits of being and offers us a glimpse of freedom through conscious surrender. The path to conscious sexuality is not out there, not in manuals or idealized bodies. It lies within the sensory map of your own body, waiting to be traced with the ink of presence and loving curiosity. It is a journey back home, to the territory of feeling. As we delve deeper into this exploration of conscious pleasure, we arrive at an essential crossroads, the encounter with the other. If the first part was a solitary voyage through the inner landscapes of desire and instinct, this second part is about how that personal discovery resonates and intertwines with the presence of another being. Here, Butterly's philosophy gains a practical and visceral dimension, and Bauman's critique of the liquidity of relationships can be confronted by the solidity of shared presence. Eroticism, at this stage, ceases to be merely an internal experience and becomes a bridge, a liminal space where two subjective universes can, for a moment, merge without losing their individuality. Conscious erotic connection is perhaps one of the most powerful ways to counter Bauman's liquid modernity. In liquid relationships, the fear of entrapment and pain leads to constant vigilance, to maintaining escape routes. The other's body is appreciated, but also kept at a safe distance, as a consumable object that can be replaced once it ceases to deliver immediate satisfaction. In this model, lust is often confused with novelty, and desire withers under the weight of routine and familiarity. However, when we bring the lens of conscious pleasure to an encounter between two, something fundamental shifts. The goal is no longer to seek an external spark of novelty, but to explore the infinite depth already present in the moment, in the person before you. This requires a vulnerability that liquid modernity teaches us to avoid. It asks us to lower our shields, not naively, but with the courage born of self-knowledge. When you know the topography of your own shadow, your fears and darkest desires, you can present yourself to another more wholly, without needing to hide parts of yourself you deem unworthy. This integration, this bringing to light what was once in darkness, is what allows true intimacy. Intimacy is not about showing only what is socially acceptable or lovable. It is about allowing the other to witness your complete humanity, with your fragilities and your strengths. It is in this space of mutual witnessing that eroticism can bloom in its fullness. Returning to Buddhali, this shared experience is the practical enactment of the little death. In unconscious sex, there is a search for climax, for discharge, for conclusion, a linear movement. In conscious pleasure, the focus shifts to the state of dissolution itself, to the ecstasy of the process, not merely its result. It is in the kiss that lasts longer than usual, in the gaze held beyond the surface of the eyes, in the touch that seeks not only to excite, but to feel life itself pulsing beneath the skin of the other. In these moments, the barrier that separates the I from the other becomes porous. You are no longer merely touching a person. You are participating in their sensory existence. This is the sacred transgression, the mutual and consented violation of the very limit that defines us as separate individuals. It is a freedom found not in the possession of the other, but in the surrender to a shared field of experience. Practices such as Tantra, when stripped of their superficial exoticism, are essentially technologies for cultivating this presence between two beings. They teach you to breathe together, to synchronize internal rhythms, to use the gaze as a form of deep touch. In a tantric practice, for example, sexual intercourse can be seen not as an end, but as a means for joint meditation, a circulation of energy that amplifies consciousness rather than annuls it. The body is both temple and instrument, and desire is the fuel for a journey of mutual self-discovery. Orgasm may happen, but it is not the master of ceremony. It is one of the many phenomena that can emerge in that shared space of attention. In this context, lust transforms. It ceases to be a binary state, having or not having, and reveals itself as a subtle, multifaceted energy. It can be the lust of curiosity, of tenderness, of admiration, of pure silent presence. When we free ourselves from the tyranny of orgasm as the sole measure of success in an erotic encounter, we open space for an infinitely richer range of sensations. We may discover that a prolonged, conscious embrace, full of presence, can be as or even more erotic and satisfying than a mechanical act focused only on release. Desire becomes a continuous conversation, not an internal monologue or a demand. It is a dance of intentions, of questions and answers given not with words, but with skin, with breath, with gaze. This approach also invites us to rethink the archetypes we carry in our sexuality. Margaret Mark and Carol Pearson, in The Hero and the Outlaw, explore how these archetypal figures shape our behavior. In conventional sexuality, we might be performing the archetype of the lover, seeking perfect union, or the outlaw, breaking rules to feel alive. There is nothing inherently wrong in this, but when we identify rigidly with an archetype, we lose the freedom to be fluid. Conscious pleasure allows us to dance among archetypes. At one moment, we can be the lover, in another, the outlaw, in another, the sage, observing with curiosity, and still in another, the innocent, discovering pleasure as if for the first time. Freedom lies in not being any of them permanently, but in using their energies as colors on a palette, painting the experience of the moment. Therefore, this second part of the journey is about the courage to meet the other from a place of inner integrity. It is about transforming the erotic encounter from an act of consumption into an act of co-creation. It is about learning the language of the other's body with the same patience and curiosity with which you are learning your own. And above all, it is about understanding that true eroticism does not reside in the quantity of stimulation, but in the depth of connection and the quality of presence you are able to offer and receive. It is a practice that demands courage, for it forces us to abandon control and to trust the flow of life that circulates between two beings. In this space, sexuality reveals its wisest face, that of a privileged path of encounter, not only with another body, but with the very essence of life expressing itself through it. The journey toward conscious sexuality, after traversing the inner territories of self-knowledge and the shared landscapes of encounter, culminates in a point of final integration. The experience of the sacred within the profane, of the eternal within the ephemeral. This is not a conclusion, for the process is continuous, but rather a plateau of perception where conscious pleasure ceases to be an isolated practice and becomes a lens through which one can experience life as a whole. Here, Butterly's concepts of transgression and the sacred merge with Jung's notion of individuation, and Bauman's critique is answered not with rigid solidity, but with conscious and grounded fluidity. The body, desire, and instinct are no longer aspects to be managed, but guides to a more vibrant and authentic existence. When we speak of integrating instinct in Jung's vision, we are not advocating a return to a primitive state of irrationality. On the contrary, integration means elevating instinct to the realm of consciousness, allowing it to inform our decisions and enrich our perception without dominating it. A fully integrated conscious pleasure is one in which the intelligence of the body and the clarity of the mind work in collaboration. Presence becomes a baseline state, not a forced exercise. In this state, desire is not a demanding master, but a subtle messenger pointing us toward growth, exploration, life. It shows us what we lack, what longs to be lived and integrated. To ignore desire is to ignore an inner compass. To follow it blindly is to be dragged by it. Wisdom lies in listening, dialoguing, and discerning its true message. At this stage, the very notion of freedom undergoes a radical transformation. Freedom is no longer the absence of limits, whether internal, like self-imposed beliefs, or external, like social conventions. Instead, freedom reveals itself as the ability to choose with which limit to dance, which limit to consciously transgress in the name of a deeper experience of life, as Butterly proposed. Conscious sexuality is, by essence, a practice of responsible freedom. It is the freedom to say yes from a place of full self-knowledge, and the freedom to say no from the same place of inner sovereignty. It is the freedom to explore the nuances of desire without getting lost in them, using them instead as doors of perception. Here, erotic experience transcends the private realm and touches the cosmic. Eroticism, in its highest expression, is not confined to the contact between two bodies. It becomes a quality of relationship with existence itself. It can be found in the pleasure of feeling the sun on the skin after a cold day, in the ecstasy before a breathtaking landscape, in the deep satisfaction of creating something with one's hands, in the shiver caused by a piece of music. It is an attunement to the pulse of life in all its manifestations. The body ceases to be merely the vehicle of sexual pleasure and recognizes itself as an integral part of the body of the world. This is the culmination of self-knowledge, realizing that the self is not an isolated fortress, but a node in the vast web of life, constantly touched and transformed by it. From this perspective, practices of body awareness and conscious sexuality are not hobbies or self-help techniques, but spiritual disciplines for our time. They reconnect us with the immanent sacred, with the divinity that inhabits flesh and bone. In a world that often denies death and sanctifies a disembodied idea of spirit, embracing the body in its totality, with its pleasures, its odors, its textures, its decay, is a revolutionary act. It affirms that transcendence is not elsewhere, but in the very heart of sensory experience, when lived with full presence. The most intense moment of conscious pleasure, when time seems to stop and the self dissolves, is a glimpse of eternity. It is a state of grace accessible to all, regardless of beliefs or dogmas. This journey, therefore, is not linear. It is circular, spiral. There will be days of deep connection and presence, and days of distraction and automatism. The practice is not about perfection, but about conscious returning, again and again, to curiosity and openness. It is about remembering that pleasure is not a luxury or a sin, but a biological and spiritual necessity, a guiding thread that leads us back home to our essential nature. Desire, in this sense, is the vital energy that drives us toward life, creation, connection. To deny it is to wither. To accept it unconsciously is to be ruled by it. To integrate it in the light of consciousness is to make it an ally in the art of living a full, authentic, and profoundly meaningful life. Thus, we reach the end of this exploration not with a definitive answer, but with a permanent invitation. An invitation for you to continue knowing yourself, exploring the recesses of your shadow, honoring the wisdom of your body, and daring to meet the other from a place of vulnerability and truth. An invitation to see eroticism in every corner of existence and to live each sensation as an opportunity to reconnect with the mystery of being alive. The freedom you seek is not in a distant future or in an ideal circumstance. It is here in this moment, in the quality of your attention, in the depth of your breath, in the courage of your desire. It is a freedom won from the inside out, an act of sovereignty over your own experience of being. May you have the courage to seek it, not as a destination, but as the journey itself.